For thousands of years, we built our homes from the ground beneath our feet. We scooped up clay, mixed it with straw and sand and water, packed it into walls 2 feet thick, and called it shelter. No architects, no engineers, no building codes, just earth, shaped by hand, dried by the sun, and left to stand. Some of those walls are still standing. In the English county of Devon alone, an estimated 20,000 cob homes remain in use today, many of them built before Columbus ever set sail. A cottage in Devon dated to 1539 still shelters a family inside walls that have never been fitted with central heating, never been retrofitted with fiberglass insulation, and never required a single kilowatt of air conditioning. The interior stays comfortable through winter and summer alike, not because the occupants endure discomfort, because the walls themselves regulate the temperature. We abandoned that technology, and what we replaced it with may have been, in one critical respect, a step backward. To understand what medieval builders achieved, we first need to understand what they were working with. Across medieval Europe, the vast majority of people lived not in stone castles or timber manor houses, but in structures made almost entirely of earth. The specific techniques varied by region and by century, but the underlying principle was universal. Take the subsoil available within walking distance of the building site, combine it with organic fibers, straw, animal hair, dried grass, and use it to create walls of extraordinary thickness and density. In southwestern England, this material was called cob, a word derived from the Old English for lump. In the timber-framed regions of the Midlands and East Anglia, builders used wattle-and-daub, a woven lattice of hazel or willow branches plastered with a thick mixture of mud, dung, water, and straw. In North Africa and the Middle East, the same instinct produced adobe. In Yemen, it produced mud brick towers 13 stories tall. Nearly half the world's population, to this day, lives in some form of earthen dwelling. The English cob tradition is particularly well documented. A typical cob wall measured between 18 and 24 inches thick, roughly the width of an adult's outstretched arm from elbow to fingertip. The mixture itself was simple: clay-rich subsoil with a clay content between 3 and 20%, blended with sand for structure, knit straw for tensile strength, and water to bind the whole mass together. The preparation was brutally physical. Workers shoveled and stomped the mixture by foot, or drove heavy oxen back and forth over it until the consistency was right. Then, using a cob fork, they layered the material onto a stone foundation. One lift of about 18 inches at a time. Each lift had to dry completely before the next could be added. A single wall could take an entire building season to complete. The result was a structure unlike anything we build today. Cob walls had no cavities, no air gaps, no separate interior and exterior layers. They were monolithic, single, continuous masses of dense earth, smooth and solid from one surface to the other. Windows were small and deeply recessed, set into walls so thick that the sills became shelves. The roofs were thatched with straw or reed, overhanging the walls by at least 8 inches to shield them from rain. The old Devon saying captured the only maintenance rule that mattered. All cob wants is a good hat and a good pair of shoes, a waterproof roof above and a stone foundation below. Provide those two things, and the walls would outlast the centuries. And they did. Cob cottages built in the 15th and 16th centuries still stand throughout Devon and Cornwall. In Brittany, earthen homes over 500 years old remain inhabited. In New Zealand, a cob house built in 1855 has survived 3 major earthquakes without a single crack. But the most remarkable feature of these buildings was not their durability. It was what happened to the air inside them. The phenomenon is called thermal mass, and for most of human history, no one had a name for it. They simply knew that earthen walls kept a house cool when the sun was blazing and warm when the frost arrived. The experience was so consistent, so reliable, that when 19th century laborers in Devon were relocated from their ancient cob cottages into newly constructed stone houses, they described the move, in the words of one Victorian observer, as going out of warm life into a cold grave. They were not being sentimental. They were describing a measurable physical reality that modern building science has only recently begun to fully quantify. And it begins with a counterintuitive fact. Cob is a terrible insulator. A foot-thick wall of cob has an R value of approximately 3, roughly equivalent to a single pane of glass. By the standards of modern building codes, which typically require R values of 13 to 21 for exterior walls, a cob wall should be functionally useless at keeping heat in or out. But it is not, because insulation and thermal mass are two fundamentally different things. And for centuries, we have been building as though only one of them matters. Insulation resists heat flow. It slows the transfer of thermal energy from one side of a wall to the other. A well-insulated wall is like a dam. It holds the heat back. Thermal mass, by contrast, does not resist heat. It absorbs it. A dense, heavy material like earth, stone, or clay soaks up thermal energy the way a sponge absorbs water. It holds that energy inside its molecular structure, and then releases it slowly over hours as the surrounding temperature drops. The critical concept is thermal lag, the time delay between when heat strikes the outer surface of a wall and when it reaches the inner surface. A 250 millimeter rammed earth wall has a thermal lag of approximately 10.3 hours. A concrete wall of the same thickness lags by about 6.9 hours. A medieval cob wall at 18 to 24 inches thick could delay heat transfer by 10 to 12 hours, almost exactly half a day. The sun beats against the outer surface at noon. The warmth reaches the interior at midnight. By then, the outdoor temperature has dropped and the cycle reverses. The wall begins absorbing the coolness of the night air, releasing it back into the interior the following afternoon, precisely when the occupants need relief from the day's heat. The result is a building that breathes with the rhythm of the day. Where a modern insulated home experiences sharp temperature spikes and drops that require mechanical intervention, furnaces in winter, air conditioning in summer, a cob home with 2-foot-thick walls experiences indoor temperature fluctuations of no more than 3 to 4 degrees Celsius year-round. In much of temperate Europe, that narrow band falls within the range of human comfort, without any mechanical heating or cooling whatsoever. The walls were not barriers against the climate, they were mediators of it. Temperature was only half the equation. The other half, and the one that modern building science has been slowest to appreciate, was moisture. Clay is hygroscopic. It absorbs water vapor from the air when humidity rises and releases it back when humidity falls. A cob wall functions as what natural builders call a moisture flywheel, constantly buffering the indoor atmosphere, pulling excess dampness out of the air during cooking, bathing, or breathing, and returning it during dry spells. Studies on hygroscopic materials have demonstrated that clay and lime plasters can moderate indoor humidity swings by 10 to 20%, holding conditions naturally within the 40 to 60% relative humidity range that modern health organizations now recognize as optimal for respiratory health. This matters enormously because moisture is the single greatest enemy of the modern home. An estimated 75 to 80% of all building envelope failures are caused to some degree by moisture, condensation forming inside wall cavities, mold colonizing hidden surfaces, wooden framing rotting from the inside out. The problem is structural. Modern homes are built with layered wall assemblies, an exterior cladding, an air gap, a moisture barrier, insulation, a vapor retarder, and interior drywall. Each layer is designed to serve a specific function. But wherever warm, humid interior air meets a cold surface within that assembly, and in winter it inevitably does, condensation forms. The moisture has nowhere to go. It accumulates in the dark spaces between the walls, invisible until the damage is done. A cob wall eliminates this problem entirely. There are no cavities, no hidden spaces, no layered assemblies where moisture can accumulate undetected. If water penetrates the wall, typically from a roof leak or plumbing failure, the evidence appears on the visible surface, where it can be addressed immediately. The monolithic structure of the wall is its own moisture management system. The breathability of the clay is its own ventilation. Medieval builders did not understand hygroscopy. They could not measure relative humidity, but they understood, through centuries of accumulated empirical knowledge, that earthen walls produced interiors that felt different, drier in wet weather, less parched in dry weather, more consistently comfortable than any alternative available to them. The clay was doing the work. It had always been doing the work. The advantages did not stop at temperature and moisture. Cob is fireproof. The combination of clay, sand, and straw, once dried, does not burn. Historically, cob without straw, known as fire cob, was used to build chimneys, fireplaces, forges, and crucibles. You're in a medieval world where fire was the most common and most feared destroyer of homes. An earthen dwelling offered a level of safety that timber construction simply could not match. The Great Fire of London in 1666, which consumed 13,200 houses in 4 days, burned through a city built overwhelmingly of timber-frame structures with wattle-and-daub infill. The devastation was so complete that Parliament afterward prohibited timber-framed construction within the city limits entirely. The replacement material was brick, fired earth, processed and standardized, but fundamentally the same substance that cob builders had been using for centuries in its raw form. Cob walls also absorbed sound, or their density and mass dampened exterior noise while enriching interior acoustics, a quality that anyone who has stepped inside a thick-walled earthen building notices immediately. The silence is palpable. It is not the dead silence of a soundproofed recording studio. It is the warm, enveloping quiet of a space where the walls themselves seem to absorb the restlessness of the outside world. And then there was the matter of cost. Cob was, in the most literal sense, dirt cheap. The primary material was subsoil, available beneath the feet of anyone who cared to dig. Straw came from the harvest. Water came from the nearest stream. The only significant investment was labor. A community could raise a cob house using nothing but human effort and locally available materials, with no need for specialized tools, imported supplies, or professional contractors. In a medieval economy where cash was scarce and communal labor was the norm, this made earthen construction accessible to virtually everyone. So, if earthen walls were fireproof, thermally stable, moisture regulating, acoustically superior, and essentially free, why did we stop building with them? The answer lies in a convergence of economic, social, and technological forces that historians call the Great Rebuilding. Between roughly 1570 and 1640, a wave of construction swept across England that fundamentally transformed the country's domestic architecture. Rising agricultural profits, driven by enclosure, population growth, and access to expanding urban markets, gave yeomen, merchants, and even middling farmers the financial means to upgrade their homes. At the same time, new materials became available. Brick, once reserved for royal palaces and aristocratic estates, grew cheaper as manufacturing techniques improved and transportation networks expanded. Glass, which had been a luxury item throughout the medieval period, became affordable enough for ordinary windows. The social pressure was immense. A house built of brick and glass signaled prosperity. It announced that the owner had risen above the peasant class, that he could afford materials that had to be purchased rather than gathered. Wattle and daub panels gave way to brick nogging. Cob cottages were replaced with timber-framed structures featuring brick chimneys, glazed windows, and separate rooms for cooking, sleeping, and entertaining. The open hearth, the ancient center of domestic life, was enclosed within a masonry fireplace. And the smoke that had once risen through a hole in the roof was channeled through a dedicated chimney stack. Privacy, specialization, and display became the driving values of English domestic architecture. The Great Fire of London in 1666 accelerated the transition. After the fire, Parliament mandated brick and stone construction throughout the city, and the gathering of thousands of skilled bricklayers to rebuild London spread the material and its techniques across the country. By the end of the 17th century, brick had transitioned from a prestige material used by the wealthy to a standard building material available to most classes. The earthen wall, the oldest and most widespread building technology in human history, was being systematically replaced. What was gained was substantial. Brick homes could be built faster. They could rise higher. They accommodated larger windows, which admitted more light. The enclosed chimney transformed domestic heating, allowing multiple rooms to be warmed independently. The compartmentalized floor plan offered privacy that the single-room medieval dwelling never could. But something was lost. The thermal mass of a 24-inch cob wall could not be replicated by a 9-inch brick wall with an air cavity in the middle. The hygroscopic properties of raw clay could not be reproduced by fired brick, which had been chemically transformed by the kiln into a material that absorbed and released moisture far more rapidly and far less usefully. The monolithic, cavity-free construction that had made cob buildings virtually immune to hidden moisture damage was replaced by layered assemblies full of gaps, joints, and potential failure points. The new homes were brighter, they were more fashionable, they were undeniably more versatile, but they were not, in the most fundamental physical sense, warmer. The trajectory that began with the Great Rebuilding reached its logical conclusion in the 20th century, when we stopped trying to work with the climate and began trying to overpower it. The modern home is a sealed box. Vapor barriers wrap the frame. Expanding foam fills every gap. Double-glazed windows eliminate drafts. And mechanical systems, furnaces, air conditioners, humidifiers, dehumidifiers, do the work that thick earthen walls once did passively and for free. The insulation is effective. Modern fiberglass bats and spray foam deliver R values of 13 to 25 per wall, an order of magnitude higher than cob. Or's heat loss through the envelope has been reduced to a fraction of what it was even 50 years ago. But the walls have no mass. They store no heat. They buffer no moisture. They are, thermally speaking, membranes. Thin, lightweight barriers that resist heat flow in one direction while offering nothing in the other. A well-insulated modern home, with the heating turned off in winter, will drop to the outdoor temperature within hours. A cob home with no heating will maintain a stable interior temperature for days, releasing stored thermal energy long after the fire has gone out. One system demands constant energy input to maintain comfort. The other embeds comfort into the walls themselves. And the moisture problem has, if anything, grown worse. The tighter we seal a building, the more we trap the moisture generated by cooking, bathing, full breathing, and simply existing inside it. A family of 4 produces roughly 10 to 15 liters of water vapor per day through normal activity. In a breathable earthen structure, the walls absorb and release that moisture in a continuous cycle. In a sealed modern home, it has nowhere to go except onto the coldest available surface, typically a window, a poorly insulated wall section, or, worst of all, inside the wall cavity itself. Professional mold remediation in a modern home typically costs between $10,000 and $30,000. In a cob home, mold almost never establishes itself, because the clay walls never allow the sustained humidity above 60% that mold requires to colonize. We solved the insulation problem, we created the moisture problem, and we never stopped to ask whether there was a material that could address both. The story of the medieval earthen house is a story of trade-offs. The cob cottage was thermally brilliant but dimensionally limited. Its walls were too thick to allow large openings. Its construction was too slow to meet the demands of a rapidly urbanizing population. It could not be standardized, could not be manufactured, could not rise above 2 or 3 stories without risking structural failure. In a world that valued speed, scale, and visual display, it was destined to be left behind. But the principles it embodied were not primitive. Thermal mass, hygroscopic buffering, monolithic construction, passive temperature regulation. These are not folk superstitions. They are physical properties, measurable and reproducible, that modern building science is only now beginning to reintegrate into mainstream practice. The Passive House Standard, NAS, the most rigorous energy efficiency certification in contemporary construction, increasingly recognizes that insulation alone is insufficient, that buildings need mass to store and moderate heat, and breathable materials to manage moisture without mechanical intervention. Rammed earth construction, stabilized with small additions of lime or cement, is being used in high-end residential projects across Europe, Australia, and the American Southwest. In 2019, the International Residential Code formally approved an appendix governing the use of cob in load-bearing walls, the first recognition of the material in modern American building law. In Devon, where 35,000 cob buildings still stand, some very ancient indeed. Its specialist firms using traditional methods continue to maintain and extend structures that were built before the Tudor dynasty came to power. These are not museum pieces, they are homes. Warm in winter, cool in summer, quiet, dry, and structurally sound after half a millennium of continuous use. The market agrees. A well-maintained cob and thatch cottage in Devon routinely sells for $750,000 to over £1 million, not despite its earthen walls, but because of them. We spent 5 centuries replacing earth with brick, brick with concrete, concrete with drywall and foam, each generation convinced it was improving on the last. And in many ways, it was.